Unrestricted. It's another episode of the official podcast of All Elite Wrestling. I am here, Aubrey Edwards, along with my co-host, Will Washington, and we're going to get right to it. As a reminder, AEW is sponsored in part by Upper Deck. The 2025 AEW SP Game Use set is available now. It's the first ever AEW release packed with autographs, tech cards, real match replicas, pulled straight from the ring, including championship gear, event banners. We even have the fork, the one-of-one fork from All in Texas that you saw Hangman pull out of his boot. You can grab your box at a local hobby store, hit upperdeck.com, find a store near you. I wanted to get to this quickly because I am very excited.
Yes, I'm very excited.
Dude, anytime we have a repeat guest, I'm like, this is going to be great because there's so much more to talk about. But this one in particular, we're hitting the ground running. As we mentioned recently, this book is All Elite, the inside story of All Elite Wrestling, is out now. And we're excited to have, again, Keith Elliot Greenberg back on the podcast. Hello, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me back. You know, the last time I was on the podcast, the book hadn't come out yet. So I was a little coy about what people might or might not find in the book. Now everybody knows.
Yeah, now everybody knows. And if you haven't if you haven't purchased the book yet, first, by the way, purchase the book. It's available at book retailers near you. But this episode's going to get a little spoilery. So if you're trying to hold off getting surprised by all the cool backstage stories, might want to come back to this one, download it, keep it on your phone, come back later. But yeah, we're going to talk a lot about kind of our moments that like you've learned from the book, moments that we found really special in the book. There's just so much to get going. So I think we should just hit the ground running. Let's go.
Well, you know, first off, the big thing I want to talk about here is just the fact that like, you know, AEW has been around 6 years, right?
6 years.
And it's hard to encapsulate in just thinking about it, what you can get done in 6 years and how much of a stamp you can make on professional wrestling. And that's what I really think this book did particularly well, is it really puts into perspective like how much professional wrestling history exists in just those 6 years. And
you know, it's so funny you say that because I was thinking about this today. You know, the concept of the forbidden door, we take that for granted now.
Right.
And think about Tony Khan was the one who was kicking open the forbidden door. And that was not something as North American fans we were accustomed to. Recently, we saw that spectacular women's blood and guts match.
Yes.
This book talks about Thunder Rosa and Dr. Britt Baker, you know, in the ring, shocking people in the midst of the pandemic with that. So think about how far we have evolved just in a few short years in AEW history.
It's wild. And that was one of the ones that I tagged in the book to talk about. Because that match itself, I remember kind of a moment in time, people were so shocked to see it just because of the like societal implications of like, people don't want to see women bleed and whatnot. But like AEW has done such a great job of kind of moving past that. And now like the women are an equal level, if not more sadistic than the men in some cases. But like seeing Britt and Thunder's match together in that lights out match in the pandemic was great. But then also seeing like their rematch later in San Antonio where Thunder Rosa won the belt. And it's special to me because I was in the match. So there's a fun little picture there. What page is this? This is page 152. But then also just seeing like what it means to people, not only from like a representation standpoint, but like that match in particular, I completely forgot about this, but Thunder Rosa had hired an entire band of mariachis that were all women. So it was like, she was basically like integrating her culture into this in her hometown, in this amazing moment and what it meant.
And her gender.
Right. Oh my God. It was so good, man. So great.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes you think about how exciting it all was. You know, when AEW premiered, those early years, even during the pandemic, it was so fresh, so new. Unless you were following the indies, most people who were watching, you know, TBS or TNT had not encountered this wide variety of wrestling before.
Well, that was one place I wanted to start because, you know, I remember when we were conducting the initial interviews for this book, I sat down with Chris Harrington and we had a super long conversation it to the point of where we kind of had to stop pretty abruptly after we got pretty deep in. But there was a lot of stuff I didn't know in that conversation that ended up coming forth, and we ended up just some new information I got out of that. And that was kind of what I wanted to ask you about was, how did you feel coming across, or I suppose a better way to phrase this question is, what was the most surprising thing about the origins of AEW that you came across as you were gathering the information for this book, listening to these interviews, and talking to people?
Well, first of all, let me just compliment both of you, because I could not have done this book alone. And aside from the great photographers and the art directors who've contributed so much to the aesthetics of this book, I relied on people like you who are real day-to-day insiders conducting a lot of these interviews and uncovering this information. And there was such a comfort level that the talent felt with each of you, that stuff flowed out that, I don't know if I would have been able to get that by myself. It's funny, I bought into the myth that AEW would not have existed except for All In. Mm-hmm. I should have scrutinized it a little more, but the popular narrative is All In took place in 2018. Tony Khan was sitting there in the audience and he goes, "I'm going to start a wrestling company." The reality is Tony Khan knew what it took to start a wrestling company and knew you don't start one up in 6 months. Yeah. So by the time All In took place, Chris Harrington, who you previously mentioned, was already on the payroll as AEW's first employee, coming up with a strategy that had to make Tony Khan's lifelong vision work.
Yeah, and I thought, obviously that was one of the many myths that had been shattered upon working in AEW and learning those things. And yeah, just kind of, as that story, and you really get into this in the book, of talking about how that was really something Tony was really already, he had the ball rolling. He had, he kind of had a bit of a proof of concept going. And really what All In served as was an example of the fact that it could be done. And, bringing all of those pieces together is really what made AEW become AEW. But the ball was already rolling at that point.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that, and you guys know him far better than I do, but I think Tony Khan always believed that he could make this happen. And guess, go ahead. I'm sorry, Aubrey.
No, I was just agreeing with you. Absolutely, he could.
And I guess seeing an event like All In take place must have been a reaffirmation. But I think regardless of the success of the original All In, Tony Khan would have pushed through regardless. The other thing that's so cool, and again, we have to look at it now through history, through the lens of history. Now All In is AEW's biggest show of the year.
Yeah.
And it all sprung from that.
It all comes full circle. It's funny, I just opened up to this one page. There's a quote from Excalibur talking about sort of All In, because there's people who were just kind of involved from All In. They weren't involved so behind the scenes as much as we see from the Bucks and Chris Harrington and all those sort of guys. But there's one from Excalibur that says, Excalibur, who called the matches from the broadcast table, wasn't sure, quote, "When the show was over, I thought that was it. I thought this would be the biggest thing I ever did in wrestling, and I was quite content with that."
Right. And if that was the biggest thing he'd done.
Right. And it's he was doing great things.
Pretty cool. Mm-hmm. Right. But now he's a week-to-week staple that we all look forward to hearing from. And I'm going to say something else behind the scenes. I mentioned this in the acknowledgments. I've written numerous books in my life. If I include children's books, it's over 40 books.
Congrats.
I have never received notes as scholarly as those I received from Excalibur, because he's been a wrestler. He's been a promoter of PWG, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, which was, the promotion that every indie star wanted to take part of. And he is the voice of AEW, or one of the voices every week, So no one turns a phrase quite like he does.
Right. And it's like for all that he does backstage as well, it's one of those things where like I can't imagine an AEW without Excalibur. It's also fun to hear like so many of us backstage say like, oh, Tony Schiavone was the voice of our generation when we were growing up, and Excalibur is that guy for everyone who's watching wrestling growing up now. And it's kind of incredible to think that like you were calling matches in Reseda.
Right.
Now you're the
by
weekly voice
himself. With
by himself.
Nobody
with
in his ear,
occasionally Chuck Taylor popping in.
Right.
Well, and I think that's the really great thing about Excalibur, and that like talking with him, because he and I got to sit down and have that conversation, and it was like I think what people underestimate about AEW's entire journey and its entire story is that a lot of people involved. There was a lot of experience that came into AEW. You know, when you talk about when you talk about the Tony Schiavones of the world, you talk about Taz, you talk about Jim Ross, you talk about a lot of guys in front of the camera, behind the camera, a lot of guys who did have that experience. But a lot of guys, like Excalibur, had to learn TV
on the fly.
by fire, had to essentially learn TV on TV. And it was such a cool story getting to hear from him and getting to hear how, he had that commentary experience, but there's a lot that goes into calling matches and calling television, where you have to drive traffic, you have to make sure that you're promoting the show as the show goes on, but you also have to deal with commercial breaks, you also have to deal with timing. There's so many different things, and it was really cool getting to hear that from him and kind of see his growth from the as we mentioned, the indies to All In, and again thinking All In was going to be the biggest thing he ever did, and now he's gotten a call All In Wembley. And that is, I do think that that's such a cool part of AEW's history, and he's such a cool part of AEW's history. I am a believer. I'm a big Excalibur guy. I will be the first to say that.
Who isn't?
I think history is going to be really kind to Excalibur in terms of when you look back at AEW's origin, you look back at the voice of AEW, and it's one of those things where like, look, I've also been a really big Tony Schiavone guy, but Tony Schiavone will be the first to tell you that like the love and respect for Tony Schiavone didn't happen in real time. It happened kind of in hindsight thing. Like as he became a legend, you started to look back and go, wow, he's been at this a really long time and he's been really good at this. This guy called the 91 Rumble. Like this guy has been at this a very long time. And then you look at it on the other side. Was it 90 or 91?
You're talking about, I think it was 91.
Okay,
I like that two historians are trying to figure out like
with a tear in my eye.
Yeah, I did think about that one for a second, but again, you think about the fact that like I think Excalibur is one of those names that, as so many historic moments have taken place as we've gotten to cover in this book, and his voice got to be attached to all of them. He's going to be one of those names that we talk about in hindsight as somebody that's gotten to be a big part of wrestling history.
But let's also remember, AEW has made a concerted effort to embrace history.
Yes.
So, we're mentioning Tony Schiavone and him being a part of history. He's still making history.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, look at what just transpired on Halloween when Hangman Page dressed up as Tony Schiavone and, and caused a lot of chaos. That is a story we will remember 20 years from now.
Absolutely. And there's a ton more stories to talk about from This Book Is All Elite. We're here with Keith Elliot Greenberg. We got to take a short break, but stay tuned because there's more behind the scenes to talk about in the making of this book, in addition to all of our favorite moments coming up after the break.
AEW Unrestricted. It's Will Washington, Aubrey Edwards, and we're with our guest, Keith Elliot Greenberg, the author behind This Book Is All Elite, the inside story of All Elite Wrestling. It's available now. Definitely make sure you're picking this one up if you got a wrestling fan in your life who you're trying to figure out the right gifts for this holiday season. Right here, gift. This is the perfect gift. Literally, I love having this sitting on my coffee table as just kind of a conversation starter. It's one of those like, well, what do you do for a living? And I'm like, oh, well, let me show you. And then, So it's a lot of fun. And again, it's such a great book, you know. And when we talk about some of the stories, and we're talking about some of the voices you get to hear from in this entire book, but like photographically, I think that's really where this book is truly a marvel. And some of the pictures that you've never gotten to see before. And some of the behind the scenes pictures, some of the in-ring photos. It is a true testament to some of, you know, we have some of the best photographers in the world working for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, there are these moments that, of course, you wouldn't see on TV. But there's a moment where Adam Cole and MJF, after the first All In Wembley, come backstage, and there's Tony Khan hugging each of them. That's a moment we as fans who are watching
right there.
Home, right there,
there it is.
There never see. And this is why this is a perfect coffee table book, because even if you don't read, and as an author, I'd prefer that everybody reads what I wrote. But if all you do is look at the pictures, it's pretty exhilarating.
Yeah. Oh, look at that. I just found the photo. Speaking of photos, there's just like some incredible photos in here of some of the most memorable matches. Like this one, which is very tinted red, but Darby, and you can see his back bleeding because this is after he went through the pane of glass in Sting's retirement match.
Yep.
And just these big little story in the book.
Right. Yeah. Like there's a whole section that I had actually tagged in here. And I know, Keith, you had a kind of a story about this one as well, but there was pretty amazing backstage moments with Sting on that day. And there's an amazing quote from Darby in the book that says, "I told him, you only get to have one retirement match and we will have to kill it." He smiled, Sting smiled, and said, "Let's take the chains off."
Right, right. And boy, did they take the chains off. And Darby
buddy.
also talks about going through that glass, laying there with his insides coming out, seeing the fans reacting to Sting, seeing Sting thrive, and instead of considering his personal pain, being exhilarated about what he's helping to create.
Absolutely. And like Sting has not shied away from talking about his love for Darby. And I think like all of us know it, but like the two of them are still extremely close even to this day. Sting calls him all the friggin' time. But like this whole moment in sort of capturing Sting and Darby together, because Sting was done and then just sort of magically showed up one day at Winter's Coming during the pandemic and immediately kind of points out Darby Allin. And since then they had this incredible run, one of the best runs in all of wrestling, even considering it's like Sting's final run.
Undefeated as a tag team.
Undefeated as a tag team. Like it's incredible. There's a whole story in here where he was talking about how he thought he was just going to do cinematic matches and that was it. And then seeing how Darby pushed him to do more. And he's like, I'm doing things I had no idea I could possibly do.
That he'd never done. This is a guy in his 60s that he'd never done before. And so there's Darby inspiring him.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things I like love most about that run of Sting's is that, you know, I was a little Stinger. I grew up with Sting. Sting's one of my favorite wrestlers. And like, it's amazing that there's a generation that now knows Sting as the guy who dives off of the stage and as the guy who like does these big stunts. And you're like, you know, that's not how I knew Sting, actually. I knew Sting as, you know, Sting, I was, because people forget, TV doesn't do his size justice, right? Sting is a big guy.
Very tall.
Right. He's very tall. But then, you know, when you think of Sting in the 80s, you know, Sting was extremely muscular. He was, and so, you know, there's so many different eras of Sting. And I think that AEW got to be a big part of the historic career of Sting and got to close out his career in a way that gave people incredible moments, incredible memories. And again, it's stuff that's really captured in this book. Whether it's the pictures, whether it's the stories, there's so much you get out of this, you know, to the point of where I remember when this book was originally planned, the timeline was supposed to be from original All In to All In Wembley. And then it was like, oh, but Sting's retirement's coming up. We have to fit this in here. And that was a big adjustment to the deadline, was how much Sting's career had altered the story of AEW, that Sting's retirement is to this day the biggest show we've ever done. And and it meant so much to get that story in here.
I mean, look, there were so many things that were happening while I was working on this book. While we were all working on this project together, and then there was the debut of Adam Copeland. I remember, like, you and I were supposed to have a chat backstage, and suddenly Adam Copeland debuts, and now we're so swept up in things, we're not, catching up in terms of plotting out the book project. And so it's like, I can't leave that out either. And at a certain stage, I said, I have to draw a line. I can't keep adding and adding and adding. There'll be another 5 years, and all of that can go in.
And that's the beauty of pro wrestling, is that it never stops. To tell a story of professional wrestling, you do have to pick a hard stop, because at some point, you're never going to run out of things, especially in AEW. We're always looking for what our next major moment is, because wrestling is about the moments, and we've had so many in the history of AEW. And yeah, to think about, all right, the cutoff is Sting's retirement, because at that point we can't go any further than that. Because just as we said that, of course, my brain just went to, well, literally the following Wednesday, Okada debuted in AEW.
Right.
So like literally there would, if we hadn't come up with a cutoff, there would have been more and more story to tell. And
I mean, think about in the second part of this, the first 5 years, the second 5 years. Yes, Okada was there, Ospreay was there, but now look at what those guys have done.
Right.
Look at the legacy other people are forging. Look at somebody like Kyle Fletcher.
Oh my God,
At the
yes.
first All In, he was in the tag team match in 0 Hour.
Right.
Now Kyle Fletcher is a superstar for the ages. Look, Chris Statlander, who's mentioned in the book, now she's the women. As of as of at least, I don't know what's going to happen this weekend, but she will all. Let me put it this way: Chris Statlander will always be remembered as an AEW Women's Champion. That can never be taken away from her. And that's the second 5 years of AEW.
Right.
Yeah. And, as I continue to look at pictures, one of the most iconic moments, one of the most iconic visuals in AEW, and I'm so glad we got to capture it in this book, is, of course, thinking about Anarchy in the Arena. And Eddie Kingston coming down to the ring with the gas can, and seeing that immortalized in this book, I think is such an incredible visual. It's such an incredible moment. It's one of those, again, you have this as a coffee table book, and you want to really tell some stories to people, like to just get to tell somebody the story of exactly what was going on here, seeing Eddie Kingston with his gas can, blood pouring down his face. That is what I love about AEW. It's what I love about this book. And again, like I said, it's in stores now. You can pick it up. And it makes a great coffee table book. It makes a great gift. We've still got so much more to talk about here on AEW Unrestricted. We're here with Keith Elliot Greenberg. This is AEW Unrestricted. We'll be back after this.
AEW Unrestricted. You've got Aubrey, you've got Will, and you've got Keith Elliot Greenberg, the author of This Book Is All Elite. We've been talking about all of these exciting moments in AEW's history, some behind the scenes in the book and whatnot. And since Keith, you did put the book together, you took all these interviews that we've done and kind of figured out a way to tell the true story and have the feeling of AEW kind of come through on the pages. But I wanted to touch on if there were any like big milestones or big events or moments that you really think helped define what AEW's identity is.
This is an interesting thing, and this isn't the first time I've spoken about it. Early on, when AEW was finding its legs, and you guys know that because you were right in the middle of it, there was AEW had no choice but to rely on prior history that preceded the formation of AEW. Now, 5 years later, AEW has its own rich history. So this run of Hangman Page as champion is so different than the first run of Hangman Page, which is chronicled in depth in the story and in the book. And, as Tony Khan explained, This was part of a year-long storyline where Kenny Omega and Hangman Page were champions and good friends, and they have a breakup. And then a year later, there's Hangman Page becoming, in some ways, I think the first really organic AEW champion. The man, even though he'd worked in Ring of Honor and other places, the first champion who is truly associated with AEW, as opposed to, say, Moxley and Jericho. And now we have this other run, and we've seen Hangman go through all these other incarnations. And it's cool to look back at that part, that first run, and look at him now and put those all together and put everything in context.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that obviously, yeah, Hangman had gotten known by a lot of independent wrestling fans through his run in Ring of Honor and wrestling in New Japan and things to that effect. But I think a big part of it is that he hadn't reached the top. And I think, because even Kenny really got known on American TV through AEW, but, Kenny's career had world championships from New Japan and whatnot. And so really getting to see Hangman Adam Page, he felt like, for AEW fans, for people who had been watching the 2 years prior, it felt like, okay, we watched him ascend to this point to become AEW World Champion at Full Gear, and then of course 3 years later do it again at All In Texas and become World Champion again and again. It's like he went on a journey in front of those fans. They watched him become a man. They watched him become a father. They watched him become a destructive man who burns down houses, and then come back full circle to become the Hangman Adam Page that everybody knows and loves.
And that's true, because think about when he won the title from Moxley. Here's Swerve rescuing him. I mean, Hangman Hangman burned down Swerve's house. Swerve broke into Adam Page's house. And so these are AEW stories. We don't have to reference the history of these guys from before they were in AEW.
Not at all.
And now AEW has its own history, which just fuels the machine week to week.
One of the things I love is, like, I see Swerve as an AEW guy because he lives and breathes AEW spirit, right? And then seeing like the thing covered in here where he showed up at a Revolution signing a contract. I'm like, wait, he wasn't a day one guy? Like, and I remembered like, oh no, he had this whole thing before. And I think that's really like one of the things that is unique about AEW is highlighting that history, as you said. And one of the things that I liked in the book was hearing like from Chris Harrington specifically, like how the conversations happened backstage in Japan prior to Wrestle Kingdom, where they're trying to like sign the Young Bucks and Cody and all these guys. And it's like, there is this history that's all intertwined between these companies and not really figuring out like,
and
there still is. Right. Oh man, it's just there's so many cool and interesting things, and like a lot of things that are very surprising. So I'm kind of curious, like, what was the most surprising thing that you learned about AEW through this process?
I mean, that's so hard because there were so many surprising things that took place. I just think it's seeing people who came into their own in AEW and hearing it from their perspective. I wouldn't call it surprising, but it's kind of inspiring. Even talking to a guy like MJF, who at the original All In was happy to be on 0 Hour and be the guy who lost just to get the exposure. And now you think about MJF and what he means. So those are the cool things to just, I wouldn't say it's surprising, but just to look at where everybody who we see today, where they all came from. Look, we all knew Toni Storm was a great talent, but look at the latest version of Toni Storm.
Right?
I don't even know where it's going. So
I don't think she does either.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And like you said, talking about women's wrestling, and we got to have great conversations with people like Hikaru Shida, right? And she one of the stories she recalled was in this book. She talked about the first All In and that that 6-woman tag match that really, I think, put Joshi wrestling, I think, in the eyes of a lot of American wrestling fans who had never really gotten to be exposed to that. And I remember nobody in that match really knew what was next, including you, right? That really nobody knew like what was going to be the next step for everybody involved in AEW. Where are we going to be at Dynamite? Are we going to be even at All Out? I don't know. And again, I think getting people's perspectives from the time period is what I got most out of this book, is what I enjoyed most about the book, is hearing, the behind the scenes at Double or Nothing, at the first AEW event, hearing kind of how it was all coming together and how people were feeling about how the show was stacking up, and how, there were all these expectations, there were hiccups here and there. But at the end of the day, everything, once the red light went on, we had a show, it happened. And by the end of it, the only feeling was, we're ready to do this again.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And think about, this whole pandemic era and how AEW had to pivot during that era. And I'll say this, one of the most pleasurable parts for me was writing about that first Stadium Stampede match and listening to the participants talk about them planning it out. And they say, okay, we're in this empty stadium. Well, there's a goalpost. And, Matt Jackson goes, hey, maybe I'll do, was it a flip? I'll do a moonsault off the goalpost. There's was it Matt Jackson? Was it Sammy Guevara who was the victim of the 100 yards of Northern Lights suplexes into the end zone?
God, I remember that moment where Matt Jackson says, yeah, I'm going to do a bunch of Northern Lights throughout the length of the football field, and how much pain he was in at the end of that.
Like, that's one of those, like, sounds like a great idea. Like, and it's a great visual idea. But like, you don't really think. We're
definitely going to cut in between because we don't want you to have to do this the whole time.
But then, because you don't quite think about, like, and it's just wrestling in general, right? Where sometimes talent can get in those moments of, this is going to be awesome, this will look awesome, and this will be one for the ages. But like, how am I going to feel after this? Is like, you know what? Let that be future me's problem. And that's one of those things that, you mentioned Stadium Stampede was a memorable moment of the pandemic. And then, you think about the fact that I was having a conversation with somebody about this in AEW maybe 2 weeks ago. We were talking about how that particular time period really got to be a good opportunity for a lot of people who hadn't gotten TV exposure, right? Like, you talk about like a Powerhouse Hobbs who hadn't gotten that yet, but at the same time, it's like there was a lot of time in AEW where we had to make do with what we had. And the beauty of getting to do that is that when you get to make do with what you have, sometimes you discover that who you have there is actually a star in the making, and you didn't realize it because you didn't have access to a lot of guys who were overseas or unable to travel or whatever it was. And so, you did get to find certain guys, and that's really, I think, the unsung success of the pandemic is how many guys you got to discover in that time period.
Right. And even the inspiration that the Gunn brothers, Colton and Austin Gunn, were responsible for backstage. I didn't know about that, because there was nobody, there weren't fans in the arena. So they were sitting there with jars full of coins, shaking those jars. And these guys were still completing their training at the time. And they went from that to becoming integral parts of the AEW family.
Yeah, like, I remember when I first, because tag team wrestling is very hard as a referee, and really, like, Billy Gunn and his legitimate sons, Colton and Austin, were really the ones that taught me how tag team wrestling sort of works. And it's hard to think about working during the pandemic era and not thinking about hearing Austin Gunn's shrilling voice, like, keeping us going past midnight on a lot of different nights, especially the ones that are very cold. Like, he kept that energy up the whole time. And the fact that those sort of things are captured in here is really important, because like those are little tiny moments. Like if I was just having that conversation with someone, but to know how important those are to the history of AEW and the people involved that were living it at that time, is really, really interesting.
Including you listening to his voice and probably thinking, oh, does he ever stop?
Right. Like, get that boy a lozenge, right? Like, it's 2:30 in the morning.
Yeah, you know, I can't say enough good things about just the stories we got to tell here, the stories you got to tell here, and the cool thing is AEW story is still unfolding, and you know, I hope that Keith, you get to write the next one. What is, you know, to me, you know, I guess that would be my major wrapping question here is, what do you feel like you learned from this experience that you'd want to take into the next chapter of AEW?
Well, I mean, on a personal level, you know, I look at myself as a pro wrestling historian, and you know, because I'm in my 60s, I'm really fortunate that people just don't associate me solely with what happened in the past. AEW is current, and to tell the story of something that's a current phenomenon, to be chosen to do that is, and I'm not being corny, it's an honor to me. And to have this trust invested in me, and after the book is out, to still be able to maintain that trust, it makes me exciting. And I'm as excited about the current state of AEW as I was about any other phase of professional wrestling in my entire life. And I've been watching since the early 60s.
Oh man, this is such a great conversation. Keith Elliot Greenberg, I'm so happy we had you on the podcast again to talk about this book. Now that it's live, it exists, it's real. And I like the fact that I can hold it in my hand, and there's all these like unique stories that I heard the first time when like I was having the conversation, and then seeing them on paper just means so much else. So thank you for all the love and care that you put into this.
Thank you, and thank you to both of you, because again, this is just like AEW is a collaboration. This book has been a collaboration.
Of course. And thank you. If you don't follow Keith Elliot Greenberg, you can follow him on Twitter and Instagram, Keith E. Greenberg. You can get your copy of This Book Is All Elite, the inside story of All Elite Wrestling. Today, it's available now in hardcover. It is worth it just for the incredible pictures alone. It's that shopping holiday season, so it is a great gift for the wrestling fan in your life. Do not forget that AEW Unrestricted is sponsored in part by Upper Deck. The 2025 AEW SP game used set is now available. It has first ever AEW release pack with autographs, tech cards, real match used relics, just like pulled straight from the ring, including championship gear. There's that fork from Hangman that he pulled out of his boot at All In, Texas. You can grab your box at a local hobby store. After you head over to the bookstore and pick up All Elite book, you can pick up the Upper Deck pack, or you can just hit it up upperdeck.com. Find a store near you. You can listen to and follow this podcast, AEW Unrestricted, at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is you get your podcasts. Check out all the video episodes on YouTube channel where we've been showing off all these fantastic pictures. If you still haven't purchased the book, the pictures alone are a wonderful reason to get this thing. AEW Unrestricted is on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you're not an AEW insider, you can get early access to tickets, pre-sales, special merchandise offers, more straight to your inbox. Sign up today, AEWTIX.com. Don't forget, because we talk about it in the book a lot, AEW Dynamite is on TBS Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. and now streaming on HBO Max. AEW Collision is live every Saturday on TNT. ROH streams every Thursday on Honor Club. I'm Aubrey Edwards with Will Washington, along with Keith Elliot Greenberg. Thank you so much for listening to AEW Unrestricted. Peace out, everybody.